to Season 2, Episode 3 of the 3 Rule Parenting Podcast, where we have conversations about grace and how to better disciple our own kids. I am lead pastor Melissa, and I have a toddler who is 2 years old.
I'm Reverend Bill Malden. I'm an associate pastor here at the church, and I work with families, so that's children, students, and their families. And I have 2 high school kids, a boy and a girl.
I'm Reverend Kevin Anderson. I work as the pastor of community, and I also have 2 kids, but one's in high school, one is in junior high.
So this week we're kind of continuing on with episode 3 is really almost kind of just an extension of episode 2.
Yeah.
So if you haven't listened to episode 2, go back and do that.
Also, I just have to give a moment for, you immediately jumped into your pastor voice, and I loved it.
So there you go. So, I don't even know where to go with that. So we're following on.
It was a compliment.
It was,
I don't know how to take those, Kevin. Those hurt me. So we're continuing on, and so we talked about who is God, and that is being the beginning thing of what we need to talk about with theology, and everything is going to come back. So as we're talking about everything else, you're going to need to take everything else and line it back up with everything else that's gone before, but especially that question, who is God? What is your understanding of God? If whatever else you're believing doesn't work with who God is, you need to change something, and it probably needs to be your understanding of God. Or that other thing, you got to work it out. So today we're talking about the nature of humanity. And so kind of like in the strict father versus nurturing parent, how you see those can really affect not only your faith, but also your parenting. And I think there's 2 basic ways in theology that we kind of have 2 expressions of. You have kind of more the Calvinistic. If you don't know, John Calvin was a theologian in the early 1500s. Mm-hmm. And when you read kind of Calvin, you're more the theology wonk nerd than I am, and so correct me and expand.
Bill's pointing to me in this, if you're just listening.
Yeah, that's more Pastor Melissa's thing, although I'll throw this out.
No, it is.
She can decide if she needs to expand on this. But the Calvinistic thing, as I would frame it very simply, is kind of humanity is totally depraved, lacking any kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that he says it exactly, but the tone. I'll just say my read, my bias, and my tone. It almost has it the essential nature of humanity is evil. Yes. It's dirty, it's wrong, it's impure. Yeah. And so that's one way, and I think that's a view of a large part of Christian churches have this view of that's the essential, intrinsic nature of humanity.
So
Inherently, thank you.
Yeah, so you have to going all the way back when there was one early Christian church, right? There then became a split, and there was the Eastern and the Western church. So we're just going to follow the Western thought here for a moment, right? And so the Western thought, you have Catholicism, right? And Catholicism, you've got differing views, but then you had the important moment where Luther tacked his 91 theses onto the door of the Catholic Church, which is important. And the thing I'll say about Calvin, and so Calvin was a student under Luther. Okay. Calvin at least doubled down, on what Luther would say. And there's actually what is Twitter called now? X.
Oh.
It's so dumb. Anyways, there's
I don't disagree at all.
Opinions on
X,
the matter.
formerly known as Twitter,
right?
Come on.
Okay, so anyways, so Luther said that you were elect to heaven.
Right.
Calvin said you are elect to heaven, which also means you are then damned to hell. But on X, I assume there's still an account there that has these great Luther quotes. And my favorite Luther quote is that humanity is a pile of dung covered in snow, right? So that's what gets, that's the thought process, right? And so this Calvin doubles down on that. If that's Luther's, if
you're a pile of dung covered in snow, covered in a pile of dung again.
Yeah. So if that is in the snow, right, would be Jesus, right? So like if that, I'm telling you, that was Luther.
Right.
Calvin is Luther's student, and Luther disowned Calvin. Like he thought like you went too far.
You went too extreme.
Right.
You went too far, right? And so like if that's a quote from Luther,
right.
and I'm telling you Calvin doubled down and went too far from Luther, that is Calvin's thought of humanity.
But you gotta love a guy who goes hard in the paint. You know what I'm saying?
No, that's what I'm saying. Like that's why I'm like, I kind of respect you,
all in.
even though I very much disagree
You're
with
all
you.
in.
You're gonna do it.
Do it. And so what I'll say of like where we are today, right, is an interesting thing is that Calvinism has truly undergirded so many denominations that do not even realize that
they're Calvinists.
Calvinists,
Right.
Including in what I jokingly and lovingly refer to any flavor of Baptist.
Right.
So you Southern Baptist, you Baptist, you a Bible church, you
Non-denominational, but you're really Baptist.
Yeah. Any of those churches, and they were never meant to have a Calvinist theology. That's not their heritage or their history, but it's seeped in.
Right.
And so they all have this total depravity theology for the most part. Now, there are exceptions to that, but they all have generality. Now, however, and I'll let you take back, like if you want to go down, that's not our Wesleyan.
So that's what so for the historical perspective, Wesley was kind of informed by another theologian, what was it, Jacobus Arminius? And so he's kind of in the later 1500s, so right kind of after the time of Calvin. And so he influenced Wesley's thinking. And while it has some of the same things or the same language, they don't quite mean the same things when they're saying them. And again, so take it a little step further for me. I'll give my impression, and then you guys can take it from there, is that I think the Armenian Wesleyan thing kind of believes that we are inherently and intrinsically good, but in the fall, we've distorted the image of God. And so we were created to be good. Again, we didn't start a pile of dung. We may have, I would say it's more like a broken mirror. It was, we were once the mirror of God, and we've broken the mirror, and so everything's cracked and fractured. But that wasn't what we started as. And so for me, it has a little bit more grace, but take that where you will, or if Kevin wants to hop in on that.
No, I agree with that and think that the mirror is really a good way to look at that, because it's a very practical example. You're looking in a mirror. Well, if you're too close to it, it's distorted. If you're too far away, you can't see it. But then if you have ever cracked a mirror or broken a mirror, you're looking in
funhouse mirror,
all different directions, and
but there's pieces that are still true,
and you
still see the right reflection.
You can still see pieces.
I didn't realize I was making such a good analogy when I threw the mirror thing out.
No,
I'm proud of myself.
But no, it really is. So something that's really important then for the Armenians, right? Is the theology of the Imago Dei, which literally means the image of God, right? And so that is intrinsically a part of where we come from, the Genesis, the creation story, right? Where God in plural form, right? God's talking to God's self, says we made them, right? Humanity, which that's also the interesting part too, that I don't think people realize that I love in the Hebraic, the Hebrew, their Adam is actually a Hebrew word. It's pronounced Adam in Hebrew, and it has a literal meaning, and it's humanity.
Right.
And so we made humanity, and we formed humanity from the ground.
Right.
And ground is Adamah, so it's a play on words. So we formed Adam from the Adamah, and we formed humanity in our image. Right. So it's all this really poetic, really beautiful imagery to tell us about ourselves. And so if we believe that God is ultimately good, right? Like we have to go back to the last
Right.
episode, right? Because we got to say some different things about God.
Right.
If we are intrinsically bad, inherently bad, then we got to say some different
does that
things
say
Well,
about
and this
God.
is that systematic theology of God.
Yeah.
Say you believe God is essentially good, and God is good, but we're made in the image of God, but we're bad.
Yeah.
Then we can't be in the image of God.
No,
Right.
yeah.
So something's got to move there. If you have that theology that says God is good, people are bad, well, you got to change something. And
Right.
again, Wesleyan theology that I've picked up, it's no, we're very good. Again, at creation, God says, this is good, this is good. And then God creates humanity and says, this is very
This
good.
is
So our nature is
most good.
very good.
Yeah.
But we do have the issue, and we'll get to later, the fall,
The fall,
and and that's where we warp the image. But that's not our beginning, and that's not our origin, and that's not what God intended, and that's not our truest
Right.
version. So I think this shows up, and this is worth talking about let's talk about it for our theology and for our faith perspective first. I think it's important to think about that, because then it's how do I see, what does God think of me? If I think God created me to be a pile of dung, well, then that God can't love me very much. And I can't, for me, it becomes a barrier and a stumbling block to feeling the love of God if I hold this very negative view of humanity. Well, then for me, that's a stumbling block in that relationship. So theologically for me, that's really problematic for me. Again, this is one of the things you'll hear people say, well, I believe God is love, and then people are total garbage, and we're made in God's image. And you're like, wait, but those don't go together, which is why we're doing this podcast series.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to hear y'all's thoughts on that. Why do you think it's important for our faith to think through what do we think about the nature of humanity? What is your understanding of the nature of humanity, and why is it important to somebody's faith?
Well, I want to go to kind of like where you started with
Okay.
that, of like how we first must think of ourselves as loved by God, is the like putting the oxygen mask on yourself first. Because if I can understand how God can love me, because I've been formed in the image of God, and so I'm something that God has called good, and even if that's distorted and it's broken, and I know that, like, it can be restored, right? And I know we'll get into all of that, but then it becomes easier for me to then go out and help others begin to see and understand that.
I got lost. What was
Okay.
the question again?
Well, what is this idea of the humanity? So
Oh,
I'll throw
okay.
out my answer and
Yeah.
then see where you
No,
want to go.
okay, got it,
So
yeah.
for me, one of the things that becomes important is then how do I live out my calling as a disciple of Jesus? If people are essentially impure and contaminated, then what is my response? Well, what do you do with the contaminated? You get it away from you.
Right.
And so then if you don't live up to what I think you should be, what is my righteous action? Is rejection and expelling others and pushing others away.
Right.
Is them me being holy.
Right.
Or if they are evil, which again, I don't know if Calvin really says it, but I get that vibe of that's kind of an evilness of humanity. Well, what do you do with evil?
With Calvin, there would be, because
Right.
there's
Yes.
people who are elect to heaven
Right.
and damned to
So
hell.
what do you do with
Right.
evil?
Yeah.
What do you do with evil? You fight evil.
Yeah.
You conquer evil. You destroy evil. And so then if I walk with that, as I see that, again, Calvinists may disagree, but as I see that path, then the walk of righteousness is rejecting others, casting them out, and if not, attacking them, destroying them. And so that shift when we get into this Armenian, Wesleyan theology, it becomes people are lost.
Yeah.
So what do? I find them. People are hurting. What do? I heal them. People are needing of love and healing and mending. Again, we're the broken mirror. And so what is my job? To see if I can help put the pieces back together.
Yeah.
And be as close as we can to its origin. And we can't fix that. God's going to have to come in and really do it all. But that's what we're called to be doing. And so how I interact with others gets shaped by this, is that my call is to heal, love, nurture. that is what I'm called. Again, we're talking about 3 rules: to do no harm,
Right.
and do good. Because if I have that other view, what would the rules be is get away, keep that away from me, and if I can't keep it away from me, kill it.
And I can't even help but think about I'm sorry, Kevin. Like, we're going to let you talk, but I can't help but think about like one of Jesus's several of them, but I'm only going to mention one. There's a parable of where it's like a wicked person comes in and sows this very specific weed.
The bearded darnell.
Yes, the bearded darnell among the wheat. And they look very much like the wheat until the very end. And so the servants go to the master like, should we start ripping them out? And the master's like, no, because then you're going to like severely deplete. And so instead it's nurture, tend, and care for. And then at the harvest. So it's not that like at the end, there's still going to be people who don't choose. It's not a saying that like it's all lovey-dovey, right? But it's a thing that at the end it will be sorted. But it's not ours to nurture and tend and care for as the servants, doing the master's bidding.
So our role is to nurture, and then God can decide. Sort.
Right. Yeah, and I think that when talking about this, it has to do with a lot with relationship, and particularly us as humans. I don't know if y'all feel this way, but
human?
No. Let me. I hope so. But that there's certain time I want to fix everything, or if somebody's struggling, I want to help them. If my wife is struggling with something, I have a tendency to want to fix it. Whereas sometimes the best thing and the only thing I can do, I've learned this over years of marriage and being told this, but sometimes my role is just to listen. My role is to listen so that somebody can talk something out. But we have this tendency to want to fix relationships or to fix a problem, and we can't fix everything. And even not a single person can fix everything. They try to. That's why I love this analogy of the mirror. I'm so glad you brought it up. Is when a mirror breaks. Yes, we can fix it. But it's not going to be exactly the same as it was. It's the Japanese art.
Oh, the kintsugi.
Kintsugi, yeah. But then once it's put together, if I'm looking at that bowl, and it's just the way it was before it's broken, it's just a bowl.
If you don't know what kintsugi is, it's a Japanese art where they take gold.
They piece the cracks together and they seal it with this gold, and to me that's more beautiful than when I had an art teacher when I was in 6th grade. She was very good at pottery, and every time she would finish it, they're like, oh, it's perfect, it's perfect. And then she would, in my words as a 6th grader, mess it up. She would dent it in a little bit, or she would make a mark with a fingernail, or just something to make it where it was not, as I thought, perfect. And somebody had the wherewithal, not me, to ask her why she did that. And she said, well, that's because each and every one of them now is unique. They are unique. And did not dawn on me at the time, but now I just love that example of we are all unique. We are all created in the image of God, and yet at the same time we are all unique. We are all different, and guess what?
We all show a different facet of God.
We all have imperfections.
Exactly.
And so I just love that example of that art being. I don't even use the word fixed, but it's put back together in a different way, and I think that's how I see that as a way that probably every one of us, that our relationship with God is. There's going to be things that test our faith, and that tests our faith, but then once we get past that, once we are put back together, we are more beautiful, we are stronger than we were before.
And so I think it's important for us to think about our faith. Again, how does our understanding of God come down into our understanding of humanity, and how are those two things related? And then what does that lead us to within our faith? How do we act out what it means to be a follower of God? But then we bring this also into our parenting. And for me, where I think this kind of comes in is, if I look at my child and I think your essential nature is bad, well, again, what is my role as a parent is to, beat the bad out of you, whatever, frighten the bad out of you. Again, it kind of takes us back into that strict father. I think these two ideas are kind of linked somewhat. And so there's that idea there. And then if I think you're essentially good, but you've lost your way in it, then my goal is to nurture, teach, heal. And for me, this kind of brings back to, and I think we brought this up in the last season, but it kind of brings up the work of Dr. Brene Brown.
Yeah.
She talks about the difference between shame and guilt. Shame is, I am bad. And guilt is, I have done bad. And that guilt causes us to want to do better. It's pointing out the wrong thing and then making a better choice. Shame just leaves you knowing that you're bad and now believing that you can't make a right choice because bad doesn't make good choices. And so it reinforces the bad.
Identity.
And I think if we have this view that we are essentially piles of dung, it leads to shame. And shame never leads to transformation for me.
Right.
And I don't think it brings us into, shame doesn't bring us into better relationships. Mm-hmm. And so it increases the divide between us and God. Where when we can shift that understanding into a broken mirror that can be even I love that you brought up the kintsugi, that even if we repair it with gold, it may not be what it was, but it can still be beautiful, it can still be valuable, it can still be useful. And what if that's my goal, especially when I'm working with my child, especially when my child isn't doing something I appreciate or approve or whatever. The goal then is to love, nurture, heal. Let's take even that thing that drives me nuts and find the beauty in it. I had a wonderful experience with my daughter several years ago. My daughter's in drama. She's very good at it. I'm so wowed by her ability with being dramatic. But as a child, being dramatic in the home.
With being dramatic in the home?
Oh, I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Okay.
So in one of her first performances in middle school, I just thought she was hands down, lights out, farther ahead in her performance than any other kid. And I'm objective. I'm not the one that's like, oh, you're so great. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. She was really great. And I remember grabbing her right after and was like, okay, this is where all that drama goes. This is your place. This is who you are, and it drives me nuts sometimes at home, but it's why you just did that so beautifully and so amazing and so much better than what I thought everybody else in the room was doing. I was like, this is who you are. We found your thing. Even the thing that sometimes drives me nuts. Right. This is the right time and place for it, and it's what makes you beautiful and wonderful and
talented.
Again, and it's what makes you unique. It's her dramatic little self is what makes her unique. And so, I don't know, there's something in that for me when we're bringing this idea of our understanding of humanity then becomes really important of how do I understand the essential nature of my child? And then what does that mean for my role as their parent?
Yeah.
So
I'll say, like, as a single mom, one of the journeys that I've been, oh man, like, I'm getting emotional on this because it's a journey that's new for me, and it's not new, but it's hard. And but one of the things that's made me really intentional about is I have custody, right? Like that I have to share, right? Mm-hmm. I've got joint custody, and that has been so hard. And I know that I'm not alone in that. I know there are other people who have that experience and journey, and so I have to be so intentional with my time that I have with my daughter. And so, but one of the things I've also noted is that, like, there is like quality over quantity, right? Like, so one of the things that I think that I don't take that time for granted that I have with her. And so I think one of my jobs with her is the prayer serenity. And that's what I was Googling because I don't have it memorized. And it's really simple, and one day I'll have it memorized. But it's just this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And so for me, in this parenting journey, it's understanding those different elements. What are those things that are mine to kind of influence in her life? What are those things that are just beyond my control? Those times that I don't have control being with her, those elements that I may or may not want her to be influenced by, and what difference that's going to make in her world and what difference she's going to make in the world. And so that's what I see of like my understanding of humanity as influenced by God and how that impacts me specifically as a single mom, which is, it's wild to think about all those layers of things, but here we
That's
are.
what we're here to do.
Yeah, I think for me, as being a parent, and what really over the last year and a half, what I've come to realize, my son and I are very similar, and then my wife and daughter, they are very similar. And what happens when two people are similar?
They butt heads.
They butt heads. They butt heads. And so it was a frustration for me where I'm like, well, when Carson has exciting news to share, he always shares it with Kathy first.
Right.
And it's like, I was like, well, that really kind of makes me mad. It's like, oh, you
it hurts.
Whatever it is. And I'm like, but then what I started to figure out is then we see that with Kathy and Courtney butting heads is that we just really came to this understanding. It's like, okay, when Courtney is upset, she needs to come talk to me. Because, and she doesn't want to disappoint me, she doesn't want to let me down, but we can have a calmer conversation. Whereas, and I'm a little harder on Carson than I am on Courtney. I think that's one, I see him in me, and I don't want him to make the same mistakes that I made. That was a point of frustration, but now it's like, okay, but now I appreciate the moments where it's like, okay, Courtney and I have this bond that, we didn't have before, because she's coming to me with when she has, problems or issues with something. And that's something that was very frustrating, is now like, no, this is a point where we can grow closer together. She comes to me with things that she didn't, come to me with before about issues or things going on at school. And just to appreciate those moments with both of them, realizing you two are very, very different. And that I have to find ways to nurture both of you and to teach both of you. And it's going to look different. It's not going to be the same for either one of you. And I think it took me too long to come to that realization that there's just my tone of voice, the way I talk, when people are anxious, I have to be different with both children. And guess what? I'm still learning.
We're still working on it.
Still working on it. Still not perfect. Sorry.
Our mirrors are also cracked.
Yeah.
So one of the things I try to work on again is how do I see others and treat others, whether that's my children or those around me in the world. And actually one of the things that I read that was helpful is an interesting idea. It actually came from a Jewish philosopher named Martin Buber. He wrote in the early 1900s. But he had this idea called the I-it versus I-thou. And I-it is this idea that I am a subject, and I treat everything around me as objects, like people. And so if you're an object to me, and we're distinct, we're separated, if I treat you like an object, if my hammer breaks, what do I do with my hammer? I throw it away. So as a person, if you're an object to me, and all of a sudden what I use you is for a value. There's something of value I want from you. When I no longer get that value, what do I do with you? I discard you. Your intrinsic worth is only what I give you based on your value to me. And that's a way that I think most of us go through the world. And I know I struggle with doing that, and I think a lot of us do. The challenge was to move into what Martin Buber calls the I-thou. And I-thou is subject to subject. I'm not the subject that gives you value. You're subject as well. We're equals. And that we both have value that's just inherent and intrinsic. And we just have the value. And how do I treat you is I treat you as thou. Whether or not you provide me anything, you have value. And so I treat you as I would want. Again, it makes me go back to Jesus says, how should you treat others as you would want to be treated?
Yeah.
Well, that is
pretty simple,
right?
But
what does that look like? It's thou. I would like to be treated as thou, as worthy, respected, honored. And so I treat you as thou. And so that becomes I, thou versus I, it. It's interesting. It's same like with the strict father versus nurturing parent. What we do with people and what we do with God run into each other.
Right.
So where I tend to see this with people is in their prayer life. When you hear people talk to God,
that's another episode.
I know, we're jumping ahead. But when we hear people talk to God, and it's like God's a genie, let's rub the lamp, and you're a object that I want services from, and if I don't get those services, then I don't love you because that's not you had a service to do for me.
Right.
You don't have intrinsic worth and value, God, when I don't get what I want.
Yeah.
And so thou says God is thou. And God is not only thou, but God is the eternal thou.
Right.
God is the ultimate thou. And so when we understand that God is God, whether or not I get what I want or not, I love what's the praise and worship song? Blessed be the name. And it talks about, when I'm in the mountaintop, and then it's like when I'm in the desert place, blessed be your name. Whether or not my situation is good or bad has no bearing on whether or not blessed be your name.
Right.
Yeah.
And so God is thou. And so taking that into how we treat others, I think, is very important. Seeing that everybody is a child of God and is worthy of love and honor and respect. And so they become not piles of dung, but they become thou to me. And I treat everyone as thou. And as I practice thou with my neighbors, I am able to greater participate in thou with God.
Right.
And so then the challenge becomes, am I living into that in my parenting? Am I parenting my child as thou? Because you see this, and we all struggle with it. You want good things for your children, but then there's living vicariously through your children.
Right.
And I love you when you feel this need of mine, when you make me feel good and you make me look good in public. Well, what if you don't make me look good in public? Again, like we were talking earlier, I love you anyway. That is thou. And so that's a very simple thing in my mind I run through sometimes and try to catch myself. Am I sliding into it and making others objects versus am I living in thou? And thou is always mutual and honoring and caring. And it shifts how we live in the world, but I think it will also shift how we parent.
And I also think we can see this whole Calvinism has seeped into this thought process. Even I would say our political system, right? The othering of, we love to other, right? We love to it people. And so we also have to, I think, take a hard look at how do we treat humanity and how do we treat others, because our kids are watching. And so our kids are going to pick up on that, and they're either going to copy us in the way that we do that, or they're going to come to resent us for the ways that we treat others. And so the way our theology influences how we hopefully treat others is going to be a way that invites our kids to do the same and copy us in a way that we go, oh, who'd they learn that from? And we go, oh, it was from me. We get surprised. Yeah.
Well, the good and the bad.
Yeah.
And my kids will call me on when I'm being a jerk, and then it's like, ooh,
I'm not feeling very thou right now.
I'm like, you're right. It's like I was unfair to you, and that just, when that happens, it just reminds me of like, you were watching.
Yeah.
Like, I shouldn't be surprised by this, but I didn't know that you heard that.
Yeah.
And that, so it just to make sure that we are, being honest and open with our children, and that but we have to know even when we think they're not watching,
Right.
they're watching, and they're picking up things on our behavior, and to talk more about our understanding of God and other things that are really important, is, that's way more important than the little things.
Right.
So let's let the good outweigh the bad by not just what we're thinking, but how we're acting and how we're talking.
Wait, so if I wear a t-shirt that says tattoos are stupid, but it's short sleeve so you can see all my tattoos, what does that communicate?
Irony?
Hypocrisy? Hey, I'm wearing, if you can't see us, I'm wearing a Buc-ee's Hawaiian shirt, because what's more biblical than that? I mean, come on, we're in Texas, but...
I dress nice because I'm the oldest one here.
Yeah. Are you older than me?
Yeah, I'm older than you.
By like
Just 3 months, like 3 or 4
That's
months.
right.
I'm a couple months older than you.
No, but it does. Melissa brings up a good point, that you're even what you're wearing.
Yeah.
Even it's probably my fault. Courtney wears shorts all the time. Even last week or this week when it was snowing, she wanted to wear shorts to school, and it's kind of what we talked. It's like, well, I guess you're not 2 anymore.
Yeah.
You're 11. Go ahead. You can be
You'll
cold.
deal with the consequence.
Who did she learn that from? Me, because I'll wear shorts and flip flops anytime that I can.
I think Kathy probably knows to dress warm in the winter. So.
Yeah, she does. I should. I don't. But yeah, they're watching. They see they hear what kind of music we listen to.
Right.
What kind of clothes we're wearing, how we talk to people. The worst struggle for me, I've said this before, is when I'm driving.
Right.
I'm not a patient person, and sometimes I'm like, go, like, why are you not moving?
Right.
And I'm like, ooh. And now Carson is saying that while I'm teaching him to drive. I'm like, okay, this is not good behavior on my part, son. Let's not. Please don't do this. I'll be better, I promise.
Well, so that's the challenge this week. And I love that you brought us there. There's somebody that you've made an it. The person on the road is an it that you shout at because they're not doing what you need them to do. Can you allow them
them to get out of my way. That's what I need.
Or can you let them be a thou? And they're on an important journey where they need to go and are trying to get there hopefully safely or whatever. Can you go to the restaurant and treat the server as thou rather than it? Can you, especially service people, throw a little thou out there in the world, people. So that's the challenge this week. Who have you made an it in your world who you need to honor and appreciate and lift up and make thou? And have them feel that they are thou to you. That's your challenge.
And receive the benediction, blessing for your week from this podcast. Go to do good. Go to do no harm. Nope. Always do it the other way. Go to do no harm. Go to do good. And go to stay in love with God. We'll see you next week for the next episode of the podcast. Bye.
Let's do it together. Ready? Let's loosen up a little bit. Lion face. Lion face. Lion face. Lion face. Whew.